You heard who we are on this panel, but just to clarify who we are with respect to the Journal of Librarianship and Scholarly Communication, I'm Jill Cirasella. I'm the chair of the editorial board, and Wendy, David, and Daniel are all also members of the editorial board. Rebekah is one of the current co-editors-in-chief, and Harrison is the publishing services librarian at Iowa State University Digital Press, which is, spoiler alert, our next publisher. And this presentation will explain how that came to be. And if you're interested in getting back to our slides at any point, the URL where you can find them is bit.ly/JLSC-LPF2021. So I'm going to start by asking those crucial elements of journalism: who, what, where, when, why, and how. So what is JLSC? It's the Journal of Librarianship and Scholarly Communication, and some of you are undoubtedly familiar with it, but in case you're not, we're a continuously published, peer-reviewed, open access journal with no article processing charges for authors. We publish original articles, reviews, and case studies that analyze or describe the strategies, partnerships, and impact of library-led digital projects, online publishing, and scholarly communication initiatives. And the journal's website is, and importantly, will continue to be jlsc-pub.org. So next, this is a little more complicated than you might imagine. Who is JLSC? So JLSC obviously is a journal, but it's only a journal. It's not an organization or a legal entity of any kind, and it's not connected to one either. So its guardians and representatives are, at any given point, its current editors and editorial board members. So since JLSC isn't a legal entity that can enter into contracts, how is its relationship with the publisher formalized? So what's always happened, and presumably what will continue to happen as long as we're not incorporated into some kind of organization, is that the editors-in-chief sign a memorandum of agreement with the publisher. They do that as individuals. And so when new editors-in-chief come on, they then need to sign the memorandum afresh. Okay. Where is JLSC? Okay, we're an open access journal, so obviously we're online, but what allows that life online to happen? Our publisher and our platform. So Pacific University Libraries has been our publisher since our inception in 2012, and this relationship was forged because Pacific's Dean of Libraries, Isaac Gilman, was one of JLSC's founding co-editors and has remained committed to the journal's success, even though he no longer has a position on the journal. In its first few years, JLSC was published on bPress's Digital Commons platform, but in 2015, it was migrated to Ubiquity's customized version of OJS, and that's where we still are. So when? And this is sort of where our story begins. On April 4th, 2020, Isaac at Pacific contacted the editors-in-chief about the need to part ways. Economic realities would prevent Pacific from continuing to cover all of the journal's costs and from allowing us to keep pace with innovations in journal publishing. And then the editors immediately shared this news with me. So Pacific's contract with Ubiquity was set to end July 1st, 2021. Of course, we wouldn't want to go live with a new publisher on the final day of the existing contract. So ideally, JLSC would be fully migrated and live with a new publisher somewhat in advance of July 1st. So we had almost 15 months. That's lots of notice, and it's certainly more than Pacific had to give us. But at the same time, there was really no time to waste. We needed to work toward our new tomorrow with all due speed. So how? We knew we needed to find a new publisher, but how in the world were we going to do that? Trying to even answer that question brought up a whole host of additional questions, including what are our goals, priorities, and non-negotiables? Who would possibly be able to provide everything we need, including copy editing? Where would the funding for those services come from? When might we be able to finally become financially self-sustaining? And I guess it's a stage of grieving, but I have to admit that I had to take a moment to cry to the heavens. Why? I had no ill will toward Pacific or Isaac, but I did feel quite a bit of terror and some serious pessimism about what our options would ultimately be. So when I recovered from that self-pitying cri de coeur, I had to address the question of how do we even start? And this is how. By putting one foot in front of the other. I had to shake myself out of the paralysis and bring the topic to the board. And then the board also had to start putting one foot in front of the other. None of us were expert in identifying and vetting potential publishers, but we just had to keep going. Sometimes we'd feel awkward and uncertain. Sometimes we'd feel kind of like imposters. Sometimes we'd feel no more coordinated or polished than this dog here. But we had to get moving. We had to hop up on our hind legs and just start walking. And that walk forward is what we'll be discussing today. So next up is Rebekah Kati, who's one of our editors-in-chief, and she will share the perspective of the editors.
Thanks, Jill. Hi, everybody. As Jill mentioned, I'm one of the 3 co-editors-in-chief of JLSC, along with Ann Gilliland and Jennifer Sullivan. So I'm going to talk about the start of the process from our perspective and give you a sense of what we were thinking and what our priorities were. So we also had a bit of a scream to the heavens, why moment, and some panic when Isaac told us that Pacific would no longer be able to support JLSC. But we realized that the transition could be a good opportunity for the journal. So I realized I had been envisioning the future of JLSC in terms of what was currently possible with our current platform and our relationship with Pacific. But a new start would give us the opportunity to think about what JLSC could be in the future, or as much in the future as anyone could see during April in the beginning stages of COVID in the United States. So the 3 editors-in-chief and Jessica Kirshner, our managing editor, met soon after and put together a wish list for the new publisher. So we all agreed that we really wanted to keep the journal with a library publisher if at all possible. JLSC started with a library publisher. It's run by librarians. Articles are written by librarians, peer-reviewed by librarians, and read by librarians. Keeping the journal with a library publisher was true to its origins and reflected our values and also the scope of the journal's content. We also wanted to keep the journal open access without any article processing charges. One of the great things about JLSC is that anyone can submit to it regardless of financial circumstances, and we really wanted to keep it that way. But complicating that is that we also wanted to continue offering copy editing services. So Pacific generously covered copy editing services while they were hosting the journal. And copy editing has really enhanced the readability and professional nature of the journal, and we wanted to keep it. But we realized that without a stream of revenue, paid copy editing is going to be difficult. So we briefly considered making copy editing part of the editorial team duties in our meeting, but we realized that's not going to be feasible. The journal's all volunteer run, and we didn't want to add to anyone's workload. We also considered maybe having a volunteer copy editor, but also we realized that copy editing is a really valuable professional skill. It should be paid. It shouldn't be a volunteer position. Above all, we wanted a publishing partner who valued the journal and believed in our mission. The ideal publishing partner would read the journal and value the work of our authors and would express that in the RFP. We weren't really sure about a new platform though. Currently, JLSC is hosted on OJS, and as you all might be aware, OJS has its quirks. There are some things that we found very frustrating. So we were open to a new platform, but if the successful candidate was using OJS, we would be okay with that. However, the editors really wanted a platform that could be expanded in the future to accommodate new forms of publishing or new asks within the community. So we felt that the ideal publishing partner would have a good relationship with the platform provider and a track record of delivering on new features and improvements. Now I'll turn it over to Wendy.
I'm Wendy Robertson, and I'm the Institutional Repository and Metadata Librarian at the University of Iowa, and I've been involved in our journal publishing, so my part is a little more on the technical side of things that we are looking for. So we expected, as Rebekah was saying, we expected at least the same service and features that we currently enjoy from Pacific University Library. However, we are also hoping to strengthen our support for the journal, and our entry in Directory of Open Access Journals is a good summary of what we have and what we would want to improve upon. So you can see that it's no article publishing charges, published CC BY, and it's preserved in Portico. But we've not contributed article level metadata since August 2013. And this was not part of the RFI, but we hope to address this gap after the migration. Okay, next. We also wanted to ensure that the transition was smooth. Our current platform is the customized version of OJS used by Ubiquity, and we wanted to know if the potential publisher had experience with OJS or Ubiquity, or with moving a title to another publisher. So NISO has a transfer code of practice, which clarifies all parties' obligations. Transfer is a good guide to make sure everything is covered in a journal transition, such as transferring files, preserving information, usage statistics, the journal URL, including in our case, paying for the domain registration, DOIs, and the ISSN. So now we have a few questions for you just to try to engage you a little late in the day here. So next slide and the questions. So has your publishing unit transferred a title? Have you received a title? And are you familiar with the transfer code of practice? Give people another couple seconds. Okay, so most people have not transferred a title elsewhere, but it's a very slim majority. More people have received a title from elsewhere, and not many people are familiar with the transfer code of practice. Oh, I could share the results, sorry. Okay, so next slide. We also asked about DOI, future DOI registration. If you want to start the poll now while I'm talking, that would be fine. We knew that DOIs can be transferred from one publisher to another. Crossref has a smooth procedure to do this. We did not specifically ask about the ISSN because any concert cataloger could upgrade the OCLC record and could notify the US ISSN agency. And there are specific guidelines in the transfer practice that could make this smoother. In the ideal world, DOI registration would include not only article metadata, but identifiers such as ORCIDs for authors, ROR for their affiliations, funder identifiers, and the citation list of all the articles if you're using Crossref. So again, we were curious how many of these things people were doing. So I'll give you a bit more time. And I'll end polling in a couple seconds. Okay. So yes, most people do register with Crossref, or register DOIs and more with Crossref than with DataCite. And most do include ORCID. Well, there's a slim majority for ORCID and then not as many other identifiers. And about a quarter putting in the citation list for each article. So that's great. Okay, so next slide. So another important concern for us was the preservation of the journal. JLSC is currently preserved in Portico, but preservation in more than one place is better, such as with locks, clocks, in the Library of Congress. The Keepers Registry, which you can see on the screen right now, tracks where journals are preserved. We are currently one of the many in the Keepers Registry listed as archived by one agency. I'm hoping that after the migration, JLSC will be submitted to the Library of Congress as well as to Portico. A JATS file with article metadata and PDFs for each article should be sufficient. And I think that's close to what goes to Portico. So I think this is quite possible. And it would also be beneficial to have our site regularly crawled by the Internet Archive. So next poll and next slide. Just a few more seconds. Okay, so pretty good number for Public Knowledge Project, which is not surprising because that's the easiest way to do it with OJS. Several also with Scholars Portal, which is I think that's a collective in Canada. I should know that. Clocks and Locks. And unfortunately, there are a lot of us that have none. And this is something that I hope we can all do a bit better on. DOAJ has a big initiative, as you've all probably heard of a lot of open access journals that have disappeared. And so it's something that I'm particularly interested in. Okay, next slide. So and you can put up the poll if you want. Our articles currently are PDFs with no HTML. And while this is acceptable, we would like to have HTML versions of our articles as well. We asked potential publishers what they offer beyond PDFs, what they can currently publish, and what their plans would be for the future. However, we didn't ask about non-print articles such as audio, video, or data articles. So we'll give it just a little longer for polling. And a large number of us publish PDF only, which is what our publishing at Iowa does as well. But that's nice to see that a quarter of library publishers also have the HTML option. And next slide, and poll. JLSC uses a double anonymous review process for most peer-reviewed submissions, but we're considering other options in the future and would like to know whether a publisher would be able to support this. And so do you offer? I'll give that a little bit longer. Okay. So it looks like about 70% is is traditional peer review, but close to a quarter offer some other options. Oh, sorry, I meant to share anyway. Wow. Losing track of which I'm doing. Next slide and next question. The download statistics are an important part of any journal. We definitely want our existing counts to migrate to a new publisher. I don't think our current statistics are counter compliant, but this seems less critical when it's not a toll access title. We have altmetric data on our journal as well as the download counts. In the RFI, we asked what the publisher currently offers and if this would be enhanced in the future. We did not explicitly ask in the RFI if the existing data could be moved to the new system. And so I'll give you a little longer to vote. It looks like almost everyone has downloads, and a lot have views, and then there's a fair number of people that have either altmetric or PlumX, or it could be both. And like me, many people do not know if their usage statistics are counter compliant. But in some cases it is, so that's great. And the last slide. So we did not ask in the RFI about search engine optimization or whether the appropriate metadata tags were in the article pages for Google Scholar. We also did not ask about sending our metadata to ANI databases, and JLSC is indexed in 2 EBSCO databases. We did not ask if the article metadata would be available via OAI, PMH, and we hope that none of these will be issues for our new publisher. So now let's turn it over to David.
So here again, we have the schedule Jill talked about a little bit this before. In April, we became aware that Pacific was going to need to pass us on to somebody else. We quickly put together a subgroup of the board that is pretty much the group that's presenting today. That group immediately put out a quick announcement that we were going to have to migrate and that we would be releasing an RFI around September 1st. And then we set about trying to put the RFI together. The responses to the RFI were due in the middle of October, and we committed to making a selection in the December timeframe, and again with the intent to have the full migration completed, if possible, before the end of June of this year, so that we could not continue the journal without an incident. Next slide. So this is the list of things that we put in that initial announcement. The question of ownership of the journal, Jill talked a little bit about the fact that the journal really isn't an entity. We were concerned for some time about making a formal transfer from Pacific to the new journal owner. That really we calmed down and got a little bit mellower about that issue. And there's an MOU between Pacific and the new publisher, which managed things in a way that worked out well. We required that the new publisher would enter into an MOU that was similar to the one that the editors had with Pacific. That pretty much that agreement defines the operating principles for JLSC, who's responsible for what. It was important to us that the new publisher would be the financial agent for the journal, since the journal itself has no capacity to do that. And then they were going to do the things that you would expect to do in terms of hosting, copy editing, and all of the publishing services. We were asking for an appropriate financial contribution if we could manage to get that. Next slide. So if you want, you can look at the full RFI at this URL, the JLSC RFI 2020. Next slide. So the RFI had these sections in it. We had a section on background, which was the history. Most important to us was the fact that the journal was open access and that we had no interest in charging APCs. We outlined the current finances of the journal, and the cost of the journal is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $10,000 a year. And most of that goes for copy editing, with some smaller amounts for various bits and pieces around registering DOIs and that sort of thing. We outlined the financial support for the journal, which basically was, we don't have any money, but we promise to raise as much as we reasonably can. And this turned out to be, the amount of financial support that the new publisher was prepared to put on became an important part of the decision-making process down the road. And then we had a series of 17 specific questions, and Wendy's outlined the kinds of issues that those dealt with. And I'll show some examples on the next slide. As I said, the next section had to do with response that was due in the middle of October. And then we briefly outlined the selection process that we were going to use and promised to make a decision in the December timeframe. Next slide. So this is just a number of the examples of the kinds of questions that we asked. There were a number of them that were reasonably specific, like the number 13 at the bottom, that really dealt with the kinds of issues that Wendy talked about before. But it ran across a broad range of things and were the kinds of things that you would normally expect from a request for information. Next slide. So in response, when we initially sent out a request, the sort of announcement in June, and that asked people who wish to receive the RFI to notify us, and we had 23 organizations that asked to receive the RFI. We sent that out, as I said, at the beginning of September, and then we held our breath and waited to see what was going to happen. It turned out that at the end of the day, in the middle of October, when we closed out the RFI time period, we had 6 full requests or full results submitted. 5 were from universities and 1 was from a service provider. 3 were in the United States, 1 was in Canada, and 2 were in Europe. So we had a fairly broad range of responses, and while they varied in how well they did, we did believe that we had some choices involved in making the decision, and we were actually very pleased with the results that we had. So now I'll pass it on to Daniel to talk about evaluation.
Thanks very much, David. I'm Daniel Bangert, based in Dublin, Ireland, as the National Open Research Coordinator at the Digital Repository of Ireland. So I'll just say a few words about the evaluation process. You can see further details around the areas that were assessed in the RFI itself, but we looked across 9 areas with several questions within them, ranging from the contracts, the agreement terms, financial support, liaison support, general services, hosting system, editorial services, and other information. We applied a quantitative assessment rubric here with the ability to also give general comments according to a scale, and we were able to match reviewers with their areas of expertise with at least 2 reviewers against each of the items, and ended up with composite scores that were averaged. We also had a threshold with no proposal scoring 0 for any of the items, but didn't need that in the end. And we also weighted certain items of particular importance more heavily. And this is probably already evident from the discussion earlier, but these included the financial support, the hosting system, and editorial services. Next slide, please. So we had a number of strong proposals, but in the end, we're very pleased to select the Iowa State University Digital Press, which scored strongly across all the areas. And as Jill has mentioned, will be the next publishing partner for JLSC. Some of the considerations during our discussions included the type of publisher and their track record, including their alignment with the journal's values, their active support and history in supporting open access, and the type of publishing program that we were seeking. In terms of the hosting system, some proposals didn't involve moving to another system. For example, they were on OJS or Ubiquiti's customized version, while others did. And in the case of Iowa State, this included moving to the Janeway system. So for us, it was important to understand what this would involve in terms of migration processes and potential changes in functionality for the editors, authors, and readers. Another consideration was the degree of bridge funding and transition support. And this is important in a period while the journal develops a sponsorship program and allows us the space to do that in a transitional way. And finally, there, the ability to provide editorial services. Obviously, we want to maintain the high quality copy editing, layout, design, and so on. So finding a good match with the proposal from Iowa State, we took a few additional steps here before the final decision. This included a demonstration of the hosting system Janeway, and this was arranged to understand the workflows, the ease of use, any limitations, and the support offered through the development team, and what that relationship was like. We also spoke with referees that were provided. So these were editors of journals already part of Iowa State's publishing program, to get a sense of their experience with the systems and supports in place. And some of the questions we wanted to ask was just around how hard or easy things were to use or learn, whether there were any issues experienced in the past and how these were resolved. And I think I'll then pass on to Harrison to give some insights into the publishing program and JLSC's next move.
Thank you, Daniel. So just to begin, a little background about the Iowa State University Digital Press. It really is, and for here, I just have our statement about what the mission of our press is, and it really ties into Iowa State University's land grant mission to share knowledge beyond our campus borders. And so in that sense, we really believe strongly in open access publishing and finding ways to open up publishing, not just for readers, but also to publishers. We publish scholarship in alignment with the university's curricular and research strengths, and that it does include publications in libraries and archives. So we don't require a faculty or staff relationship with Iowa State University. We're open to publishing with external entities and organizations. And we also have a strong commitment to diversifying the voices, identities, and perspectives represented in the published record. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the library is really committed to pursuing open access. And as such, open initiatives is one of our library's 2 strategic priorities in our 2-year framework, which will be coming to an end, I believe, this year. And as a result of that, we're pursuing multiple avenues to open access. And a lot of this is being led by our AUL for collections and scholarly communications, Curtis Brendy, who's been working on pursuing open access agreements with publishers through a variety of means, which includes transformative agreements and subscribe to open. We also support open access publishers and repositories. And of course, that strategic initiatives includes publishing through the digital press. And I'd also mention Curtis has also been really interested in looking at the sustainability of open access publishing without APCs or reducing APCs as much as we can. And he's involved with the Transitioning Society Publications to Open Access group. Next slide, please. And so when we were looking at the request for information, we really looked at the shared values between JLSC and the Iowa State University Library and the digital press. And I mentioned some of those in my first slide about a commitment to open access publishing, and just the interest in scholarly communication and open access, and how that aligns with our land grant mission and our library's strategic priorities. And we also have that strong commitment to diversity inclusion, which we also saw in JLSC. Sorry, let me find my correct slide on my notes. And so in addition to other things, our developers with Janeway do have experience with the Ubiquity platform. They both have, Mario and Andy have both worked with Ubiquity Press, so there is experience there. And in selecting the Janeway platform for our publishing services, we found that it's a really easy, user-friendly service to use. We have really enjoyed working with Andy and Mauro to develop things that we need to support our publishing program. So we have a relationship there. And we also had experience from submitting previous proposals and previous journal migrations. So working with Andy and Mauro, we have migrated content from our digital commons space platforms into Janeway, and they have experience migrating from Ubiquity to Janeway as well. And in developing our proposal, I was also able to draw on lessons learned from previous proposals that we had submitted. And in our proposals, we try to be very transparent with costs and how much financial resources will be needed to support a journal. And with our last proposal, which is for the American Meat Science Association's Meat and Muscle Biology Journal, when I was trying to calculate how much the publication costs would be, one of the big mistakes I made was to calculate copy editing costs based on the number of typeset PDF pages instead of the manuscript pages. So the estimated costs for copy editing were about half of what they ended up being. But building on those lessons to try to figure out how we can make our publishing program sustainable. And I think working with new journals and bringing them on board is also an opportunity to strengthen the services that we provide. So we have digital preservation. We just started with clocks last year for digital preservation. In our proposal, we said we would be willing to get an agreement done with Portico, and we're working on that now. And then just looking at ways we can support copy editing and typesetting, we use J&J Editorial for those services. And I think the biggest challenge in looking at JLSC was the fact that it's not an organization. So finding ways to support it financially was of interest to Curtis and I, especially in terms of looking at making things sustainable. So we were based on Curtis's experience with the Transitioning Society Publications to Open Access group, they're involved in trying to get kind of a sponsorship model going where libraries and other partners can provide support to open access journals. And so the Iowa State University Library had, in our proposal, committed to fully funding the first year of publishing JLSC and eventually moving that down. And when a sponsorship or other financial support system is set up, we would continue to support the journal at the highest tier of support. Next slide, please. And so just an overview of the digital press and JLSC. We are using the Janeway platform. Our copy editing and typesetting services are provided by J&J Editorial. And as I mentioned with the funding, we're fully funding the first year of publishing. For the second year, as we transition to looking at a sustainable model, we're committed to funding up to half of the publication costs. And for the third and ongoing years, we'll continue to participate at the highest sponsorship or supporting tier. And next slide. And this is just a preview of what the new site will look like. We're still working on the migration and getting everything set up, but this is just a quick preview of what the new JLSC site will look like on the Iowa State University Digital Press. Thanks.